Hello. So I conducted my research on terminal high altitude aero defense systems in South Korea. Specifically, I asked two main questions. Should South Korea and the U.S. have completed their development of THAAD? And how should the two nations going forward conduct their joint military exercises? What should that cost sharing agreement look like? So a little bit of background on this. Back in 2017, North Korea launched four ballistic missiles with 5,500-kilometer range, which put Seoul well within reach of their attack. The U.S. then declared that they intended to install terminal high-altitude air defense systems, THAAD, which was met with a lot of hostility from China in terms of economic sanctions. They levied $15.6 billion in economic sanctions against South Korea. And at the same time as this, the Trump administration made the U.S.-Korean side of the issue even worse by demanding a 500% increase in South Korean cost-sharing contributions to the joint military exercises. That resulted in a one-year kind of stopgap agreement to get things along in the meantime. But the Biden administration came in and warmed relationships by agreeing to a 13.9% increase in Korean contributions. Now, with my question of whether or not they should have deployed these missile systems and going further, what should these cost-sharing agreements look like going forward? There are two main camps of schools for each question. In terms of THAAD deployment, there's the argument that that is an essential part of the sort of nuclear umbrella that works to prevent nuclear war and is a successful deterrent against North Korean attacks and will actually successfully take down ballistic missiles. The second one being a Chinese perspective and North Korean perspective, saying no, THAAD systems, their levels of surveillance are really just expanding American spy technologies to East Asia and allowing them to undermine China. In terms of cost-sharing arguments, again, there's a split here. On the U.S. side, there's what's known as cost plus 50, and this comes from a sort of nationalism regarding U.S. military. And it's an attitude that the partner nations with the United States benefit a lot from being in joint military exercises with us, but they don't fairly contribute to those costs. So the cost plus 50 model demands not only that partner nations pay the full cost of these joint military exercises, but on top of that, they pay a 50% premium. On the other hand, you have the inflation camp, which says, well, no, actually joint military exercises expands American influence, and it's super essential for U.S. foreign policy goals. As a result, yes, we should have our partner nations increase cost over time, but it should be reflective of inflation and the day-to-day cost of what different things look like at that time. For example, if base housing costs rise, then the partner nation needs to pay more for that. But if on the manufacturing side, the U.S. needs to pay more for that, then the U.S. pays a little more in that area. So this led me on a thesis, which through research I'll discuss further. But it is that the completion of THAAD was actually necessary to prevent nuclear fallout and combat dangerous precedent of allowing China to undermine U.S. forces in Korea. Additionally, the U.S. Republic of Korea cost-sharing agreement should follow an inflation model for long-term stability. And I looked at two main case studies for this. The first, of course, being the U.S. Republic of Korea cost-sharing agreement, just going through the timeline in the post-Korean War and seeing how this cost-sharing agreement found its greatest long-term stability and what that looked like. But then I also looked at the U.S.-Japan cost-sharing agreement. Japan is similar, their U.S.-Japan relationship is similar to that of U.S.-Korea for a number of reasons. First off, coming out of World War II, Japan's military was borderline non-existent, kind of similar to how following the Korean War, South Korea's military was at its lowest. Furthermore, it is based in East Asia, it is a strategic partner, and it's part of the counterbalancing against the China-North Korean partnership in East Asia. So going with that, what did I find? Well, I found a few things. First, we did find that that actually does effectively protect and deter against North Korean attacks. It's an effective anti-missile system, but also works toward deterrence. Furthermore, the THAAD system was overly politicized. When it came down to it, it backed South Korea into something of a strategic corner. Either you choose to deploy the U.S. The THAAD and disturb China, result in economic sanctions, and harm any reunification possibilities with North Korea. But on the other hand, a refusal of THAAD would have counterbalanced in favor of China and showed them that economic sanctions do work. And if reunification possibilities were more likely, it would have led to a reunification that happened on North Korea and China's terms. Some stuff that I found really interesting throughout the course of this that I didn't expect to find was that the public discussion of cost-sharing agreements is actually super harmful to diplomatic relationships. When you discuss a better deal publicly in terms of strategic partnerships, it really really undermines the U.S. dedication to peace in East Asia. And then on the other hand, when you discuss these things publicly, 96% of South Koreans actually went on to oppose increased economic contributions to joint military exercises. Then looking at the Korean-U.S. relationship and the Japanese-U.S. relationship, cost sharing proves the most effective when it is based in stone and based of inflation and changing economic needs of the day. So what does this mean going forward? Well, what we found is actually surprising. Cost-sharing agreements should occur between trade and diplomats in negotiation rooms. While ultimately the president of states, the state leaders tend to be the ones signing off on these things, these negotiations tend to be most peaceful and lead to most long-term success when they are done between state-appointed diplomats. Additionally, when U.S. politicians run on a cost plus 50, as a number of recent politicians have in the U.S., it generally hurts U.S. foreign policy goals by undermining our commitment to our partners, and it should be avoided. Additionally, U.S. Republic of Korea diplomats should actually renegotiate these cost-sharing agreements about every 5 years based on these inflation models, in that South Korean contributions do need to increase over time as coming out of the Korean War and the economic devastation of South Korea, was natural that at first they wouldn't pay a lot. But over time, with the recent 13.9 increase set by the Biden administration, this increase does prove that it is essential to long-term success of these relationships.